Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to NBA-SBL weekly series. We are in the second season, and it gives me great pleasure to have the privilege of moderating the first in season 2. Let me use this opportunity to wish everyone a very happy new year. 2023 was a very difficult year, but we are grateful that we were able to go through that year, and then we are now in 2024. What with the election, spiraling inflation rate, FX rate, flip-flopping policies, the uncertainty, the insecurity, and all whatnot. But somehow we managed to navigate ourselves through 2023, and we're all in 2024. And so it is important then that we'll have some interesting conversation as we enter 2024. And the SBL, in its usual tradition of setting the pace and trying to impact on business lawyers and the general public as a whole, has partnered with a company known as Control Risk to present this in the series of this year, Nigeria in 2024, Macroeconomic and Policy Outlook. I think it's very apt, considering that the new government is just settling in and it's a new year and time for fresh beginnings. So we thought it was important that we had this conversation and just kind of guide people through what to expect in the year 2024 from a macroeconomic and policy point of view. And so to assist us in doing that, I have with me two very highly cerebral, qualified macroeconomics and policy experts in the person of Oludamilare Adeshola. I did warn you that I would rather call you Dami. The name is
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay, Dami Adeshola and Macroeconomic Judson. I'll just start by introducing them. Dami is an associate director at Control Risk, a risk advisory firm, where she heads the global risk analysis and business intelligence practice for the West African region. She's an economist with extensive experience in research and analysis, project management, and strategic advisory. She had advised development organizations and corporates on how to navigate the African continent, minimize risk, and leverage the opportunities for the greater impact and returns. That is a pleasure having you, and I look forward to hearing you speak.
Okay.
And also, we have Macroeconomic Judson. Macroeconomic leads Control Risk coverage for Anglophone West Africa. He provides monitoring and analysis of the political, security, and operational environment in the region, with particular focus on security trends and risks in Nigeria. Interesting. He regularly delivers bespoke consulting projects for clients operating or looking to invest in the region. Macroeconomic is based in Lagos, Nigeria, from where he maintains a network of contacts throughout the region. Prior to joining Control Risk, Macroeconomic worked for the Foundation for Strategic Research, France's leading think tank on national security and defensive issues, covering security issues in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Sahel region. Macroeconomic holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in international security from the Paris School of International Affairs, Sciences Po. He has lived in Nigeria and Ghana for almost 15 years and speaks fluent English, French, Polish, and intermediate Arabic. I dare say that, Macroeconomic, you are well qualified to speak on security issues in the West African sub-region, especially having lived in Nigeria and Ghana for over 15 years. Welcome, it's good to have you here. And so, before we dive straight into it, so the structure of this will be, I wish I was an expert. I'm not an expert in economics and policy, so I would just end up being a moderator who would hand over to the experts to drill this down, and thereafter, I will do the question and answer session. So if you have any questions as they go through their presentation, please just drop it in the chat box. So, but just by way of setting the tone, as to this conversation we're going to have today. It's important that we understand that nations' economies rise and fall, and these are due to factors which are both internal and external to them, and those variables are what are called macroeconomics. And they could be environmental, they could be geopolitical, they could be policy-driven. And so those variables, interest rates, international trade, unemployment, security, foreign direct investment, treaties, and a host of others. But these variables together affect the rise and fall of economy, including GDP as well, more importantly. But for me, the bigger question is, as lawyers or as business owners, why should we sit down in this room to listen to the outlook from macroeconomics and policy point of view, when as lawyers we should be drafting agreements, preparing our court processes, advising on transactions and all that? But I mean, from a layman's point of view, I would like to answer that from a stakeholder perspective. So in that triangular stakeholdership, you have the clients that we advise, you have us lawyers as business owners, and us lawyers as employees. And so from a business point of view, the practice of law as a business takes place within this macro and microeconomic balance that we're speaking about. So we are not isolated from what happens in the economy. So it's important also that we also understand what the outlook is for the year so that we can actually plan. So it might be the case that you then decide if exchange rate is going to go higher, maybe it might be time now to plan to have more foreign clients pay you in dollars than concentrating on the local firms. For an employee point of view, it might just be that you need to understand what the outlook for inflation is to then understand whether what you take home today can actually take you home through the course of the year. And then the employers and the employee, we the lawyers, advise business client, our client. And so it's also important that we also understand the environment and the impact it will have on our clients. So for arguments, just for illustration purposes, if you advised a client who is in the manufacturing industry and the input for their products are mostly raw materials imported from other countries, you then know that if the inflation rate continues and the FX rate keeps climbing, it's going to have a massive impact on your client. So for planning purposes and for the fact that we are in this environment and we're not isolated from what's happening, it's important that we sit back, listen, and understand how this will impact on our business. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to the experts. That means over to you now. I haven't made my amateurish presentation on macroeconomics and policy.
Yes, that was very apt. We might adopt you as a political analyst.
I'm flattered.
A very good introduction. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. I have a couple of slides that I'm going to talk through. And I would like to ask everyone that if if you have any questions as we go along. I understand that politics and economic analysis is not everybody's strong forte. I will try to use layman terms to talk through some of these things, but just in case, just in case you have some questions, please just go ahead to ask. Okay. Okay. So right to it. So the Tinubu administration started off with a bang. I mean, in the inauguration speech, he gave, he announced that they were not going to continue with the subsidies. He announced that they were going to do some changes in the forex unification. So you'll see in this first chart that we have here that a lot of the reforms that has been introduced took place in the first 2-3 months of the new administration, or not so new administration. They've been in there for quite some time now. But what you would find, and I'm sure if I ask everybody in this room, what are the two main things that affect you, whether as a business owner, as an employee, as a consumer in a household, you will probably say inflation or exchange rates, if not both. But what we find is that the inflation, so rise in prices, so when I say inflation, I really just mean the rise in consumer prices. So inflation is really being driven by the foreign exchange. And unfortunately for us in Nigeria, because of the limitations when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to electricity, when it comes to power, we find that we are very import dependent. And so I'm sure if you look at your typical shopping basket for the month, things that you consume, you would find that about 50%, if not 75%, is imported. If it wasn't imported as it is, as you're consuming it, some elements of it, whether it's the input, that the raw materials that was used to, for example, your sugar, you might be buying one of the locally made sugar brands that are out there, but really they import the molasses that is used to then refine and grind into sugar. And so this is what we find. So if you see this trend, I mean, so the pink line on top is the inflation trend. That's just how inflation has been increasing. Inflation is the measure of the rate of increase in prices. And then the line in the middle is the parallel market rate. I know the government is trying to tear itself away from the parallel market rate, but really that's the true reflection of market dynamics. So it better reflects the changes in supply and demand as compared to the INE rate, which right now is the official rate. So you'd see that it's kind of moving in tandem. So when when exchange rate was flat at the beginning of the year, from January to May, we didn't see too much of an increase. Inflation sort of steadied. But now that we've been seeing a spike since the exchange rate unification exercise that was carried out in June, we've seen a continual spike, and I'm sure for those of us that deal in foreign exchange frequently, we can tell you that this spike is a week-on-week spike. So if you buy foreign exchange today, the rate at which you'll buy it this time next week will not be the same. Would have gone up by 1%, 2%, and that's what we are finding to be the case. So this is just a general overview to tell you where we are and what is the real main driver. So again, the political economy landscape, this is just looking at what some of the drivers are. What has been the impact of this dollar-driven inflation on the way that we spend as a household, the way that we spend as a business, and the way that we spend as government. So in economics, we have three main consumers. That's when you're not looking at the model that includes in the international community. So internally, in every country, you have the households, the businesses, and the government, and their expenditure or their consumption patterns is very key to driving or impacting the economic outlook for the country. So that's why it's important for us to just start and just set the tone for this. So three things I would say. There's a lot there, so you can just take your time to read through, but I'm not going to go line by line just for the sake of time, but I will highlight three things. The first is that FDI flows are very significant to Nigeria's economic market. So like I said before, inflation is being driven by foreign exchange. But if you look at it, at where we're getting foreign exchange from right now as a country, two main things: oil production, which continues to be the bulk of it. Oil production continues to account for over 80% of Nigeria's inflows in foreign exchange supply. That's in the official market. I'm not talking about the black market now. But FDI flows are another key thing that the government is looking at. And initially, so I'm saying pre-COVID, pre the oil crash in 2015, no one was really talking too much about FDI, maybe in the context of boosting and unemployment or boosting GDP, but not in the context of foreign exchange. But now that we're having such a significant crisis, we've turned for FDI as a solution. And so you would have seen in the news how the president is going about courting different investors in different countries. He's in Germany today, he's in Saudi Arabia tomorrow, he's in New York the next. And I think this just shows you the sort of where we are right now in a place of pretty much desperation, looking to boost that foreign exchange flow into the country. And so the direction of FDI in 2024 will really, really determine the extent to which we might see some respite, if we see some respite in the country. So this graph on the top right just shows you the direction that FDI went. So FDI is the bar, while GDP is the line, the pink line. And so you'll see that it moves in tandem. So you'll see how that has dropped from Q1. Even Q1 2022 was already declining compared to 2015 or 2016. But now we're at a record low. And although we still see significant capital inflow into sectors like tech, there's still a general constraint in the business environment, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the following slides. The next thing that I wanted to highlight was oil production. I mentioned that Nigeria is very dependent on oil. Oil production has been inconsistent over the course of 2023, and so main issue is the pipeline vandalism. And you'll see there was the story of a certain minister who went to a pipeline and said that this was the vandalism where people literally cutting sections of the pipeline and taking some of that oil. He said it was done by professionals, that this is not just some militants without any sort of educational technical skills who has done this. And I think that just shows you the extent to which that is entrenched. All theft is entrenched in that sector. And in the light of oil production being inconsistent, being sort of tapered at the same time, or you see in the global community, there's a lot of talk about moving away from fossil fuel, moving to green energy. So Nigeria does face a crisis, although we still don't anticipate any substantial reduction in oil production, in all use of fossil fuel relevance over the next 15 years. But by the time we get to 2030, 2035, a conversation about where are we getting our foreign exchange is going to be a necessary conversation. And so what this means for the government, and the third thing that I would highlight when it comes to foreign exchange supply is from our diaspora and the remittances that they send. That's a very key inflow that we're having to depend on right now. And so you see the way that it has affected everyone. It's affected in different ways. The prices of your household goods, your cost of living, the cost of doing business, petrol. If you're using a petrol gen in your office, you're having to produce whatever it is, you're having to import your inputs, you're having to repatriate funds. These things, these factors are affecting you significantly. And even for the government, because they have a lot of dollar-denominated debt, and so that debt servicing has significantly spiked, and then also seeing a depletion in the external reserves. So again, what are the fundamentals? Like I said, two fundamentals for me. So the fundamentals is sort of, just think of it as a foundation where it's an upside down triangle. At the very, very bottom, you have foreign exchange. But then where you then have, what are the factors that are affecting foreign exchange? That would then be the next level, where we're then talking about FDI. We're talking about oil production. And so this chart on the right essentially just says that the direction for either one. So if oil production increases, economic conditions would improve. If FDI increases, economic conditions would improve as well. The extent to which they will increase would affect the extent to which economic conditions will improve. Now, on the flip side, if we find that there's a deterioration in the current, in the way things are, which is everybody's nightmare, we will see again, economic conditions will worsen. And how that would affect, that would have a ripple effect on a lot of different things in the economy. And we see it being a self-reinforcing cycle, where right now there's weak investor sentiment, where investors are sort of staying on the sidelines. I think it was Dr. Adefulu who said that, they're coming with their briefcases, but they're not coming with their checkbooks. So they're coming and they're having all these conversations, because Nigeria is a place of high reward. And anybody, will tell you, any investor will tell you, regardless of the sector, there's a lot of promise internally in Nigeria's market. whether it's given the sheer size of the population or given the gaps that exist in services and products that are being supplied locally, you would find that there's a lot of opportunity. But at the same time, some of these challenges, especially when it comes to repatriation of funds, especially when it comes to the reliability and the predictability of some of these factors and the trends that we will talk about now, it's causing investors to just wait and just be like, you know what, let's see how things go. And as the more they wait, the more that they will continue to wait. And the more that that FDI and oil production deteriorates, the more that they will continue to wait. And so again, talking about that self-reinforcing cycle. Unemployment and insecurity, again, looking at that segment, I'm sure anyone, you don't need an economic degree if I ask you what's going to happen if things get worse, you don't need an economist degree to be able to tell me the implication for unemployment when it comes to job creation and security. I mean, we saw the video of people saying, we're hungry, we're hungry. That's what's going on out there. Everyone is hungry. And so those are some of the conversations that the policymakers are making, and I will talk about what the plans for the administration is planning, and our take on how effective that would be. And so again, why this has such a significant hold on us is because we're import dependent. If this was another country that wasn't dependent so much on imports, whether it was for food or for anything, any sort of consumable, this foreign exchange crisis won't have such a significant impact as it is having now. So the government has come up with a very long list of things that it's going to do. So even when Tinubu was campaigning, he had his manifesto that was several pages long and sort of highlighted it, brought together some cerebral folks to do that. But again, we know that there's one thing to have a sound policy, and there's another thing for the sound policy to be sound in the effectiveness and in its implementation. So just highlighting a few of the priorities that the government has said. So restructuring, raising debt, driving up oil production, divesting government assets to raise short-term liquidity, prioritizing ease of doing business. So you see that this government is quite pro-business, shoring up tax revenue, diversifying exports, attracting FDI, and driving PPI. That's public-private initiatives. Now, there will be some limitations to this, and we do not expect it to be a bed of roses or sort of, easy peasy for the government to achieve. Debt and sustainability, we're talking about conversations around debt. Right now, Ghana is facing what could be Nigeria's future, where a period of high debts, where they were consistently taking high debts and high rates, has then caused them to default on several ones, and they're talking about restructuring, and they're having all these conversations. So debt sustainability is really a concern, and the impact that would have on the credit ratings, and that would also impact the rate at which we would then borrow money if we're borrowing. In itself, debt is not a bad thing, I must emphasize. But the thing about it is that we tend to look, and I know that I see some analysts talking about debt versus GDP. You don't service your debt with your GDP, you service your debt with your revenue. And we all know that Nigeria is in a revenue crisis at the same time. And so that debt needs to be to sort of reflect the inflow of revenue. Your debt cannot, you can't base your debt plans on what you would like your revenue to be in the future. It needs to be what it is now. What are the practical things that are in place, and what do I expect my inflows to be from now till when this debt runs out? And obviously, we have issues with all infrastructure. So although you do have some interest, especially when it comes to the indigenous folks, there's you're talking about Shell divesting, and there's a lot of divestment, but at the same time, you have to talk about the oil infrastructure. Anybody who's buying into some of these licenses will have to do a lot of work when it comes to upgrading infrastructure. And then there's also still some issues around corruption. Cost of doing business is a challenge, and the public sector capacity is a constraint. Political will is something that we see. You can, if you have, I mean, you guys are lawyers, you probably deal with with public servants more than I do, and I'm sure you can see how the quality of I'm trying to be diplomatic in the way that I want, whatever I'm going to say now, but you'll just see that there's just a different way that they just do their modus operandi, which isn't going to be beneficial for implementation, the pace of implementation that the government is hoping for, and then dwindling the disposable incomes and fiscal constraints. So what is then going to happen? I've said so much, but what does this mean? Where do we see Nigeria in 2024? Now, there's good news, there's bad news. I will start with the good news. Let me start with the good news. So the good news is that things will not get too bad. We are going to see more pinch. So we will see an uptick in some of these things that I talked about, FDI and oil production, and that would help to shore up, to bring up the foreign exchange supply into the country. A lot of companies that are operating in Nigeria will start to be innovative and start to look at ways that they can reduce their importation. So whether maybe they have a product that requires 10 inputs and they used to previously import 7 of those inputs, they might be thinking now we need to significantly reduce that to 2 or 3 inputs that we need to do. So that would help to reduce import dependence and also support the forex from a demand point of view. And then also this would also support all revenue would increase, and its contribution to export revenue as well. And then also you will see some of the tax initiatives that the government has commenced that would also gain some success, and that would also support government revenue. Businesses will have some. Businesses will expand, and so you will see growth in widespread growth of 4 to 6%. Now, this is our most unlikely, and this is the most unlikely scenario. So that's why I started with the good news, where this is when everybody has been fasting and praying and there's some miracle in the country. So this is quite unlikely. Now, the bad news is that the best case scenario is more unlikely than the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario, where things take the turn for the worst, is actually more likely than things taking the turn for the rosy and the amazing, pre all crash, Nigeria. And so what we are expecting, which is the very, very bottom, I'll just skip to that. That is our most likely, that's what we're anticipating, where FDI will trickle in. Oil production will inch upward, supported by one-on-one government engagement. We'll see the exchange rate steady. It'll flatten a little bit. It's been increasing, like I said, it's literally increasing every week, but we expect to see that sort of steady and marginal increase. So when I say marginal is anything from 0.1% to 1%. A marginal improvement in forex supply. This will support inflation. Inflation will decline towards the end of the year. So we're looking at Q3, Q4 reduction in inflation, but before then, it would reach a peak, and we would see continual increases in prices. So brace yourselves for that. And then, but at the end of the day, businesses will thrive. There'll be spotted growths in some industries compared to some others. But overall, we're looking at a GDP growth of 2 to 3%. Now, debt portfolio will still be a considerable risk that the country will face. Debt portfolio would rise because the government is depending primarily on that as a source of budget revenue, and that would also raise the country's sovereign risk. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Mikosh, to just take us through security and rule of law.
Thanks, Dami, and thank you everyone for joining. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. So I'll perhaps start off with just giving an overview sort of on the rule of law and some of that, the operational environment and the impacts that has. So as Dami says, sort of Nigeria can and is very much sort of an attractive and rewarding place to do business for many companies. But at the same time, it is quite a challenging place to do business. And we see that on quite a lot of the indicators that we've got on that table, where Nigeria performs somewhat poorly against several of its regional peers, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, for example, and some of the ways we see that sort of actually manifesting on a day-to-day basis for a lot of companies working here is through the judicial system, where both sort of resource constraints but also corruption within the system mean that it underperforms, and a lot of individuals and businesses are hesitant to go towards the justice system to resolve those issues. And we see sort of the challenges that they face of quite frequently, whether that's sort of shortages of equipment or training, poor remuneration, and sort of limited political will to actually tackle and address those problems. There has been recent efforts last year. There have been proposed salary reviews to boost salaries in that sector, but it does remain underfunded. It does remain under-equipped, all of which makes it quite vulnerable to corruption or influence from other branches of government. And we see that's very much reflected in limited public faith in the judicial system, both from individuals, but also from businesses who are hesitant to go towards the justice system at times, or also just know that engaging with it can mean sort of quite long timelines for resolving issues. There is a prospect for that to improve in the coming years. Again, so some of those funding increases that we mentioned, but also there are other options. There's the introduction of new technology or centralization of data as well could really help sort of make that a much more sort of friendly and convenient operating environment and address some of those challenges. But crucially, the political will needs to be there, but also more importantly, the resources need to be there. And I'll touch on some of the resource challenges in a minute when looking at some of the security challenges. But this is very much sort of something that will remain a challenge in Nigeria, and we're not expecting it to evolve significantly in the coming years. Could we go to the next slide, please? So when we look at some of the security challenges, so you can see here on the slide some of the main security challenges that individuals and businesses will face across Nigeria. The security environment varies massively from one region and even from one state and one LGA to another. But looking at sort of how the government's trying to tackle that, Tinubu's manifesto articulated a two-pronged strategy towards tackling insecurity. The first was military-led. It's sort of what we saw under the Buhari administration, and he proposes to invest in equipment, invest in training, and better equip the armed forces to combat insecurity. The second approach is to tackle the underlying socioeconomic drivers of insecurity, because we see a lot of these issues: banditry, financial crime, social unrest, pipeline vandalism and theft in the Niger Delta. A lot of those are driven by the socioeconomic challenges that Dami's referred to several times that many Nigerians are facing on a day-to-day basis. And addressing those is absolutely crucial towards improving the security environment and breaking that cycle of insecurity linked to socioeconomic challenges. He's given examples of rehabilitating the Lake Chad Basin, for example, of reinvesting in the Niger Delta, promoting aquaculture activities, promoting blue economy in that region. And that will struggle. It's not really something the government has significantly invested in this far in its term. And there's two main reasons for that. The first is the resource constraints that I've mentioned and Dami has touched on as well. These are difficult things to do. They require a lot of money. But also existing insecurity makes it really difficult to put in place those kinds of programs, because certainly in the case of the Northeast, but elsewhere in Nigeria as well, these are active conflict zones, and those kinds of programs are really difficult to put in place. Another security policy to keep an eye on is the Niger Delta and how the government looks to contain militancy in that region. So historically, they've done this through the amnesty program, which has been very successful at limiting ideologically driven attacks on pipelines and ideologically driven militancy in the region. Under the previous administration, Tinubu's government has continued pipeline surveillance contracts. Essentially, the idea is the same in both. It's to pay off former militants and to bring them into the system to prevent a resumption of attacks. We think that this will remain quite an effective strategy for doing that. Of course, it doesn't address all of the financially driven pipeline vandalism and oil theft, but it has been quite successful so far. And that's absolutely essential to keep money flowing into the government through oil revenues. And in terms of sort of key security trends and sort of what all of this means, I'd like to sort of borrow the analogy of sharks and hippos. So sharks are sort of the thing that people see, and it's quite high profile, and they're quite scary, and people are quite worried about them. Whereas hippos don't look quite as scary, and people aren't so concerned about them. But in reality, it's the hippos you need to be worried about rather than the sharks. So a good example of this, if we can move to the next slide, please, Dami, is the expansion of Islamist militancy. So this graph uses our recorded security incidents. So if you can see on the left of 2021, Islamist militancy and terrorist attacks were almost entirely contained in the Northeast, whereas in the years since, we've seen an expansion into the Northwest, into central Nigeria as well. And this is very much sort of a trend that persists. We saw ISWAP claimed an attack in Nasarawa on the 2nd of January. And it is absolutely a key concern, sort of given how close that incident was to Abuja. And we've already seen several attacks, as you can see, within the FCT. So that threat is very much sort of there and persisting in areas outside the traditional areas of operation. And it is a new threat that many businesses will have to face and manage as they work in areas that were traditionally or historically sort of relatively unaffected by this. And people see this and this is sort of the shark. It grabs headlines. But quite often when we talk with our clients, some of the issues that we talk about are sort of the key things to be concerned about, to keep an eye on, are a lot more day-to-day. They're a lot more mundane. So good examples of this are crime and unrest. So crime is very much the main day-to-day security threat that we work with our clients to understand and to mitigate. And it will absolutely remain a key threat for individuals and for businesses throughout 2024, driven by those high levels of inflation, by high levels of unemployment. Another challenge that I want to highlight is around unrest and the potential for large-scale unrest to break out, often at quite short notice. So the best example of this was the EndSARS protests, where within just where almost overnight, and certainly within a few days, a lot of business activity in Lagos was almost paralyzed by the outbreak of large-scale protests and unrest. And it's really difficult to predict when the next mass protest is going to happen. Unfortunately, there is no crystal ball which does tell you that. But the types of issues which triggered EndSARS and which have triggered other outbreaks of unrest since are very much still the case in Nigeria. Those frustrations still persist and are very keenly felt by large numbers of people. And there is no reason why we wouldn't see a similar outbreak of unrest in the future. I can't tell you when it will happen, but there is that potential for any kind of incident that we see quite frequently on a regular basis to just escalate and to cause that kind of widespread unrest that we saw during EndSARS. So what does that sort of really mean for you as a lawyer? It's to expect disruption to business operations, to your own and to your clients, but also unpredictability within that, and sort of not knowing exactly when these challenges are going to manifest, but crucially knowing that they might, and when they do, that you are prepared for them. And then if I could finish briefly on maybe some of the regional trends and sort of where Nigeria sits on some of those. So this is something that we previously put together around sort of the risk of military coups in across Africa. Nigeria, you'll see, sort of quite fortunately ranks very low on that scale. But it does sort of illustrate that Nigeria sits within sort of a somewhat unstable and much more challenging region, even if it's not probably going to be directly affected by that coup contagion, as it's called. There are regional factors to keep an eye on. There's the spread of terrorism from Sahel-based groups as they move closer into Benin and potentially closer towards Nigeria, opening up opportunities for collaboration with Nigerian groups, which is something to keep an eye on. And also the situation in Niger, of course, just across the border. Nigeria and ECOWAS have significantly backed down from the more assertive and combative rhetoric they had after the coup in Niger. And we believe that that threat of military intervention and conflict between Nigeria and Niger has significantly diminished. It's not really an issue that we're expecting to manifest. So fortunately, we can see sort of Nigeria is somewhat insulated from some of those regional challenges. But there are certainly sort of a lot of domestic challenges which will continue to present themselves front and center for yourselves and your clients and your day-to-day operations. So I'll perhaps pause there, and I'll pass back to Dami or to Ose here.
Yes, thank you so much. So I think we are done with our slides. So if anybody has any questions, I'm not sure what the format is. I think there's a chat box. If you can just drop your questions in there, we'll be happy to answer them. It can be related to something that we've said that you need more clarification on, or even just it can be more specific and to whether it's a trend or a specific industry. We will be happy to answer those questions.
Okay, David, thanks. There's a question here, and just after the questions, we'll get the chairman, Dr. Adioye Adifudi, to wrap up. And thank you very much for the brilliant presentation. And the question goes towards talking about economics and financial businesses. How can one have the leverage of knowing what exactly Nigeria is up to and how one can go about leveraging the necessary information and break through it?
Okay. So I would advise or recommend that the first thing to do is just to monitor the news. So if you have some keywords, key things that you're interested in, so maybe you're interested in tax policy, you're interested in what the CAC is up to, any new regulations with regards to the communication sector, whatever it is. I mean, there's Google Alerts, and there are other means to set up alerts that come into your mailbox as soon as something happens in the news. But I understand that sometimes it's not as straightforward. You hear something else, but we analysts may tell you that's not, it's just noise. So again, looking through what some analysts reviews and what they're saying. So there are a few programs on some of these news channels where they invite correspondents to talk and to give their take on recent developments in the different policy spaces. And so that'll be something to keep an eye on. So essentially just keeping your eyes and your ears open to everything that's going on. The government tends to announce or publicize things that it's doing to some extent. But so if you can just keep an eye on that, I think that would definitely help for you to understand what's going on.
Yeah. And if I could add on to that as
Yes,
well,
I
would sort of talk about anticipation and scenarios, and as much as it's a cliche, sort of expecting the unexpected. So thinking about how might things play out, how might things evolve, and am I prepared for those? Is my business prepared for those? So this is something we do for Nigeria. We do these sort of individually tailored for specific clients, putting together scenarios of how do we see sort of the situation in Nigeria evolving. So as Dami does, we've done that sort of for specific regions or sectors, and essentially so that people can say, okay, if there is a massive outbreak of unrest, or if there is a huge piece of regulation that's introduced in the sector that I operate in, what might that look like? And am I prepared for what that might look like, so that if it does happen, even if it's unexpected, you've thought a little bit beforehand about what does that look like? What do we need to make sure that we're ready, so that if that does come about.
Thank you, Nicola. There is another question here, quite an interesting one, and it says, are we expecting decreased activity in the tech sector or industry? I mean, looking at the scenario you painted, this worst scenario, the base scenario, and all that, would that in any way impact on the activity in the tech sector?
So tech industry would remain one of the highest performing industries in Nigeria. That's just driven essentially by innovation, but in many senses, I mean, you have tech, you have fintech, and you have more comms, ICT, tower communications tech. But across board, with the different initiatives that both the private sector and the public sector, the government is introducing, we expect that the tech industry will continue to perform above the national average.
Okay. There is another question, but Dami, this question is going to put you on the spot. And it says, what's your projection for exchange rate, Naira to dollar, by the end of the year, given the present trend of depreciation of the Naira?
Yeah. So if this was
I told you.
exactly, yeah. if this was not an official platform, I have given you a number, but I don't know anybody to hold me or control risk for my number. But I would say I can give you a projection for the trend, which I did mention, is that there isn't going to be any respite, which is any improvement. We'll continue to see a steady depreciation. And then towards the end of the year, we might see a stabilization where before we were having, like I said, a week on week 1% depreciation. That might then happen that we go for 3-4 months and the Naira is the same. And so that's what we're expecting. We're not expecting an appreciation this year at all, but we are expecting that it will stabilize towards the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. There's a fourth question which is similar to the one you just answered now, and it goes as well. How do you see the forex crisis proceeding in the next few years? Any belief that Nigeria will appreciate against the Naira will appreciate against the USD given various government efforts?
Yeah. So we expect there to be some appreciation in the next 18 to 24 months. So that's looking at the second half of 2025. And this would be on the back of some of the government efforts that you've rightly mentioned, uptake in FDI, stabilization in oil production, and some of the export initiatives to diversify Nigeria's export revenue. We expect some of those things to pick up and to begin to show some results. So appreciation towards the end of next year.
Okay, just to try and get a similar because of this, you did mention, and we agree that most of our inflation is driven by our dependence on imported consumables.
Yeah.
How do we intend to survive to 2025 if the inflation is still high, forex is still not coming down? How do we navigate this? I mean, speaking as a household,
yes,
what do I need to do?
So, like Mikosh mentioned, it's important for everyone, even like at the business level as well as the household level, to have scenario plans. So you have a plan like I had in that slide where it was showing you the best case, where if all of our dreams come true, this is what happens. We have the worst case where if kata bust, this is what will happen. And then we have the one where it's like, this is one that is rational. It's the rational outlook. And just preparing for it. So that might look like different things to different people. I wouldn't go into the details. And so the industry that you're exposed to, the things that affect you as a consumer, whether on the household, personal level, or in the business context. And so you just sort of insulating yourself from it. We can only insulate to so much. I mean, if you told us this time last year that we would be where we are now, people would have said, "Go for fear." But here we are. And so again, that goes back to the worst case and just also just preparing for the unexpected to whatever extent that you can do so.
Just another question again that's flown from all this as well. Do you anticipate that we will still have a lot of brain drain, considering the exchange rate and the situation not getting better? Is that a threat? Is there a threat there?
Yes, of course. And I know that that's something that significantly affects the legal sector, where you have a gap in the labor market. But unfortunately, that's the reality, where you have young professionals living in their drones, and it's just really because of the economic crisis that they're facing, and them seeking greener pastures overseas. And so that will continue for the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much. I don't think there are any other questions here. So I would like to call on the chairman of the NBA-SBL, Dr. Ajoye Adefolu, to help us with rounding up and the other niceties. Doc, over to you.
Thank you, Jose. And I'd like to say thank you to Nikolaj and Damilare. I think there was one question on the in recent times, every economic conversation projects the impact of artificial intelligence technology. What is your projection on this? And how will it affect the Nigerian economy? I don't know if Nikolaj or Damilare would like to take it.
Yeah. I can say something on that, Dami, unless you want to.
Please go ahead, Nikolaj.
Thanks. Okay. Thanks. Yes, I think that's a really interesting question. I think perhaps maybe at this stage, I think Nigeria and many countries in Africa, to be honest, are perhaps less well placed than sort of Europe, North America, Asia to take immediate advantage of that and to sort of immediately apply it. But there are certainly opportunities on artificial intelligence. At least there are certainly opportunities, and I think given the way we've seen sort of technology adoption in Nigeria and in Africa, sort of in recent decades, and sort of the ability sort of to leapfrog and very quickly adapt to and adopt new technologies. There are opportunities. It will come down to individual sectors and individual businesses on how they find how AI works for them. I think technology on the whole is sort of perhaps a lot more applicable, and we've seen that sort of in the financial sector, where countries like Ghana and Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire and Kenya have taken huge advantage of mobile money technology. Nigeria has been a little bit slower on that front for regulatory reasons, but it is moving forward. But we see it sort of day to day here. I mean, the way everybody pays for things by transfer. Like I've seen, you can buy your food on the side of the road and pay by bank transfer, which doesn't happen in Europe really. So I think certainly on technology generally, there's huge opportunities to leverage that. And how that looks for sort of each individual sector and business sort of varies between them, but there's certainly a huge amount of opportunity to take advantage of that, to drive growth, to bring to expand the scope of services that are being offered. So certainly, sort of, if properly leveraged, the outlook I think on the technology front can be very, very positive.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. I have a few questions myself, which I'm going to just put to both of you. One of the slides, I think that Damilare showed, we talked about two areas in which we had to, if we saw an increase or a reduction in foreign investment and in the oil and gas sector, in increased production in the oil and gas. So what I'd like to ask you, Damilare, in relation to foreign direct, what you think is the single biggest policy that the government can undertake that would help to boost foreign direct. And to Nicolaj, particularly in the area of security for the oil and gas, what do you think is the most important issue that the government can address that would help to increase production in that area? So, what do you think?
Okay, thank you for that question. I would say that what we would have said, at the beginning of last year that the government definitely needs to do is to free the naira and to remove the peg that it currently had, and we have done that now. This should have been done in 2015, 2016. And so we believe that everything that needs to be done has been done in the policy, from the policy point of view. But right now, it's a case of, you have the disease where, sorry to go graphic, where it might start off as an infection in your toes, and the doctor's like, you need to amputate your toes. And you're like, I love my toes so much, I don't want to let go of them. And then it spreads, and then at the end of the day, you find that you have to amputate from the knee down. And so that's where we find ourselves, where this was something that should have been introduced a long time ago. We would have then already seen the benefits of it now, and it would not have gotten to the extent that it has now. But what I would say is that what we need and what the government can do is to sort of boost investor confidence. Because while they have freed up the policy, while they have introduced the different things that need to be done, investors are still reluctant, because they're like, if I bring my money in, what's the assurance that I get my money out? But what we would find is that you'll have the high risk the investors who have high risk appetites will be the ones who will put their foot first into the water. And so we are waiting for them to come. By the time they come in and they get, their money in, and there's some liquidity introduced into the system, the others with medium to low risk appetite will follow. And so it's a waiting game, really. It's a wait and see scenario where it's the investors that need to come in now. The policy is right. There's nothing limiting anything now when it comes to it. The market is moving. There's no peg. There's no subsidy in the exchange rate. But at the same time, it's then just assuring investors that, we're not going to change our mind tomorrow and peg the naira. And I think that's really what the concern is.
Okay, thank you for that, Nicolaj.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I slightly lost you. Can I just confirm your question was around what the government can do to increase oil production? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So I will say I think the biggest thing that that they can do, and this is maybe perhaps reflecting my security background and bias, but is to tackle onshore security challenges. I think when we speak with people in the oil and gas sector, that's generally sort of the biggest challenge that they talk about. So pipeline vandalism and theft is huge. But also addressing, and this is more of a question for sort of the companies themselves, but relations with local communities and the disruption that can come from those disputes. But I think if the government were able to, say, overnight sort of eliminate onshore insecurity, I think that would be one of the biggest things that they could do to boost onshore production and provide greater security to their staff operating in these regions, but also crucially to the pipelines themselves, and provide just a lot more confidence that this is an easier environment to work in. If I were to pick something which perhaps speaks more to you as lawyers, I would briefly mention regulatory clarity. The PIA has massively helped with this, but there are still sort of question marks around sort of divestment for some of the foreign companies, the IOCs, and also sort of some clarity around what sits with the midstream and upstream regulator, what sits with the downstream regulator. And I think clarifying some of those question marks, I think would also be very well received by operators in that sector as well.
Well, I mean, I'd like to thank both of you. These were excellent points. I think that this is a good way for us as the NBA-SBL to start the year, to think about what the 2024 economic outlook, what it's going to look like, how government policies and that outlook is going to affect our clients and indeed ourselves as business owners and Nicolaj, you talked about PIA divestment. I think the news of the Raek Shell deal, I think announced 2 days ago, gives the government an opportunity, I believe, to set out a stall regarding these kinds of transactions. The ExxonMobil and Seplat deal stalled for a variety of reasons. And that happened under I think the previous government. So this is a good chance for the Nigerian government to say what they are going to do, what their policy is in this area. 2024, I've heard from this conversation potentially about a challenging year. I've heard from this conversation that we should all be fintech lawyers because that's the growth area. Well, not fintech, but tech lawyers. And so I'm going to dust my learning cap and jump right into that area. But again, I hope that this has been useful for all of us that are attending, and thank you for coming out in your numbers to listen to this conversation. We expect to engage with people like control risks who are not necessarily lawyers, but can provide an insight to what will impact us and what will impact our clients in the near future. So look forward to the next set of Business Law Weekly engagements that we have and the various programs that we have installed for you over the course of the year. I know that a lot of you will have received Endurance's emails regarding renewal of your membership. If you haven't done so, please do so immediately. So thank you and wishing you all the best of 2024. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.